Hello again, Cave Dwellers. It's part 2 of our great big donation from Robin, and I think this is going to be the second and last part of this series. If you haven't already watched the first part, there should be a card appearing at the top of the screen now, so you can go back and watch it and just see that incredible week when we went and collected all of these things that are around me and we started testing them and digging into them. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this part 2. Carry on testing some of these, and we're going to get into some of those brown cardboard boxes, which who knows what mysteries are within those. So I'm looking forward to digging into all of those. In part 1, we looked at a wonderful Amiga 4000, which looked like it'd been styled for the A-Team. We checked out the A500 Plus, the Acorn A3010, which thankfully hadn't destroyed itself with its battery. And we had a look at this Amstrad 464 Plus, which had 2 holes drilled in it to adjust the azimuth settings on the tape deck here. And Richard downstairs in Heber recently got a handheld 3D scanner. So somebody suggested in Discord chat, why don't you scan the holes? Why don't you get an exact replica of the holes and then design a 3D print to fill them? And I thought that was a brilliant idea until I came back up and took a look at a Bic Biro. And who would have thought it? It's the perfect filler, at least for that bottom hole. So there you go. Who needs 3D prints and scanners when you can just use a Bic Biro? And I think we're going to start today with the Sinclair QL over here in this nice silver box, because whenever anyone sees a picture of all of this stuff, that seems to be the one that's most requested. We'd like to thank PCBWay.com for supporting our episode today. They aren't just about PCBs, but they do a tremendous job of that. They also offer CNC machining, sheet metal fabrication, 3D printing and injection moulding. If you're creating, then PCBWay.com can help you bring your project to life. Get an instant quote now over at PCBWay.com, and we thank them for their support. Sinclair, one of the most famous British brands for low-cost computing, and this 1984 QL, or Quantum Leap, was a failed attempt at capturing the business market. Inventor Sir Clive Sinclair made sure it was incompatible with the popular Sinclair ZX Spectrum, which was fast becoming a games machine, and this was so that a more serious software range might evolve around it. And he chose a curious storage format, as we'll come on to shortly. This example, like so many others we've seen from Robin's donation, is in a lovely condition box, complete with the polys, which, as I carefully slide out here, have got a nice embossed logo on the top. No expense spared, which is not something you ever say when it comes to Sinclair. And from those polys emerges a very tidy example of the QL. The design of the case is by Rick Dickinson, who was also responsible for the Spectrum's distinctive look. And the Spectrum's range would go on to adopt a QL style case and keyboard in later models. It's not a machine I would describe as stunningly beautiful, but it's also not that offensive either. Also in the box I found this anti-static bag, which contains something called a QL trump card. A big, beautiful expansion card, which apparently offers an additional 768K of RAM beyond the stock 512K, and a floppy interface. And that was important because the onboard storage medium are 2 micro drives. This format was supposed to be cheaper than floppies, but faster than cassettes, and it contained a loop of magnetic tape. They were very unreliable, they were a poor choice for the system, they were known to be unreliable because they were released as an add-on for the ZX Spectrum before the QL came along, and it would appear that nobody other than Sinclair wanted this format. There's also these things in the box, which I had to check the user guide. It says they're plastic feet, and they're designed to tilt the whole system forward to make it more comfortable typing on the keyboard. The user guide is also in the box, but underneath that I found an old keyboard membrane, which suggests a new one has been fitted at some point, which is a good sign as these things love to crumble at this age. So let's test it out and see if it turns on. And remember, we're just testing today. Anything more in depth will be covered in a dedicated episode at some point. Here on the right hand side of the machine are those 2 micro drives, and in this box is QL Chess. It's a game, Sir Clive, a game, although chess I guess is allowable on a serious machine. And inside is the original and a backup of the game. Now I read in one of the user guides that the first thing to do with software on this machine is back it up and use the backup to load from, not the original. That wasn't uncommon advice on other systems, but it's particularly pertinent with a QL. Now the good news is that the system turns on. I've crudely tuned it in over RF, and I've not yet figured out how to fine-tune the channel on this Alba television because I've got a universal remote with it, so I haven't quite figured that out, but the image is a little off, but the system is fine. The bad and expected news, once I'd worked out the commands to try and list the contents of microdrives and load software from them, is that the microdrive or the media just won't load anything. I've tried all the media that I've got with it, I just can't get it to load. And that really doesn't come as any kind of surprise. So the QL is working, we've got that trump card, we can add a GoTech, and hopefully that will be the way forward when we revisit this. But for now, just a big tick in the box because the QL is working. The MTX 512, this is one that keeps calling me because I've never seen the box before. It was a rare computer. I'm sure with such a nondescript box, many of those boxes got thrown out. We must make sure to pick it up using no hooks, handle with care. Right, let's take a look at this one. There's also a loose one as well. We can look at that at the same time. So I grab this, and then over here, we've got an MTX 500. So we'll take that as well for a look. Computers don't get better looking than this. The brushed metal casing of the MTX, which dons the same A-team styling that the Amiga 4000 was trying to emulate in episode 1. We have covered this machine on the channel before when we had a show and tell, and we discovered then that it came out in 1983 based on the Z80 CPU, and the 500 has 32K of RAM, while the 512 has 64K. That lovely case is made of aluminium. It has a quality keyboard on it and it can run the CP/M operating system, and prices started from £275 for the very lowest model. The manufacturer, Memotech, were UK based and started out building add-ons such as memory expansions for the ZX Spectrum before trying to go one better themselves. Arguably they did technically, but sales wise they certainly didn't. It is yet another commercially unsuccessful British micro, I'm afraid. The 500 that we have here was loose, and then within the box is a 512, or at least it tells us there's a 512 in there, so let's take a peek inside. Out come the polys, and just like the Sinclair QL, we've got a nice embossed logo on the top. I wonder if the packaging came from the same factory. Once inside, as we've come to expect from Robin, it's in pristine condition, a lovely example of a 512, as well as a power supply and all of the required cables. The only thing sexier than an MTX is two MTXs. And if you're watching this with a partner who's not really interested or paying attention in this retro tech, I'm talking to you, just look at it. You know it's true. There are cutouts in the polys in which to insert tapes. We've only got a copied tape with ours, so I think we're missing something if we want this to be complete. But we have got the operator's manual, a well-used operator's manual. And when I pulled that out, underneath it, I was delighted to find a couple of program listings, which had been printed out on computer listing paper on a dot matrix printer. It's all written out in assembly, and there's a few handwritten comments along there. And this shows me that someone really invested their time into this machine and learned how to code for it at a very low level. There's no indication as to what this program does, but I did take great pleasure in unfolding it all and waving it around the cave like I was an Oliver Twin on a photo shoot for my latest Codemasters game. And then I had to fold it all back up again. They never tell you about that less glamorous part of the job, do they? Anyway, a quick system check now, and it was mixed results. Here's the MTX 500, which fired up great. I resorted to the usual 10 print, 20 go to 10 coding. I didn't really feel like typing in that whole assembly listing, sorry. But what I did worked, and it did it all on a pleasing blue background by default. A little like the Amstrad CPC's blue background, but a more pastel-y tone. The 512 though, that was a different story. Firing this one up emitted a long beep from the internal speaker, a beep that would never end. Sounds a bit like a BBC Micro trying to boot up, which makes a distinctive beep when it does. When the BBC boots up, it gives you a long beep, which is random data, and then you get this short beep, and that's when the system's ready to go. I suspect we're hearing the same here with the MTX. Random data coming through the speaker, but it never stops. Something is holding up the system from fully booting, and that's going to need some inspection. Another Commodore then, a quick one, because we all know the Commodore 64, but I can't ignore it in all its glory. Look at that lovely matching dust cover. Oh, very executive. And there's also, to match that C64 bread bin, there's the later C64 here. Same machine, different casing. So let's test those out together. Okay, this one's going to be really quick before we get to something slightly more exotic again. Everyone knows and loves the C64, don't they? And these dust covers from the period make the old bread bin look even more lovable. We've got a data set here with matching dust cover, and that looks tidy when we remove the dust cover there. And we've also got a really fine example of the C64 itself. That looks really great. Lovely colour, the keys look great, everything about it just looks spot on. This is a beautiful C64. And what better game could there be to test it out with and make it sing than this and my very, very badly timed taps of the spacebar. And that, Cave Dwellers, is why I'm not a DJ. Both the original style C64 and the later C64C, which I'm using here, are working perfectly. You can see me playing Bruce Lee on it here, one of my favourite C64 games, and indeed on other platforms too. I used to play this an awful lot on my Amstrad. These are, and will continue to be, super popular systems in the cave and in future videos as well, which means having some spares is really important, and now we have some. Brilliant. Now, let's put you back to bed. There we go, and we'll move on to something else. Okay, what next? Scanning. We haven't looked at the Texas Instruments, the TI-99 over here. Let's grab this. Away we go. This TI-99 4A looks like a fun machine with both English and French language on the pristine box there. It really does look lovely. Texas Instruments were a major chip manufacturer, so they were kind of a big deal. This 4A is a 1981 update of the 1979 TA-99, and in it they house a TMS 9900 CPU, so that's a 16-bit CPU, making the original TI-99 the first mass-produced home computer with a 16-bit CPU. What it didn't have is a 16-bit bus, so we can't really call it a true 16-bit computer. And there were a few cartridges in here too, including Basic, very useful, and that smash hit action game, Household Budget Management. I also found a couple more. Car Wars is in there, and there was another one called Munchman. As we lift the machine out of the box, it reminds me, that brushed silver aluminium, of a DeLorean. But unlike the MTX that we saw earlier, it's actually a plastic case. This isn't aluminium. That's not to say it's unattractive. I quite like the look of it, and the keyboard also looks very inviting and nice to type on. I noticed the text on the right hand side. Solid state software is what it calls its cartridges, and technically they're not wrong. First things first then, the machine does power on with a satisfying beep, and it shows off its colour palette with some coloured squares on the screen. Having worked out how to program my universal remote control better, I was now able to get the menu on the screen and then tune the RF in better so I can get a great picture with this TI. And then the moment you've all been waiting for, Household Budget Manager sprang into life with dollar signs on the screen, and look at them being crushed as I sort out my finances. Then I played some Munchman. Now this computer has hardware sprite support, so the machine can give you a really good fun flicker-free game, and I did have a lot of fun with Munchman. It was very enjoyable. From what I can gather, this machine wasn't a great success, and it appears a large part of that was because Texas Instruments shunned the hackers and the hobbyists. They didn't provide the information or the tools to help people easily write software for it. No schematics were ever released for it, and we would often find schematics at the back of the user manual just as standard with micros of the time, but not with the TI. And in 1983 they announced cartridges would have a lockout chip to stifle third-party developers. As a result, developers, well, they just didn't bother with it. And I'm sure there is a much deeper story to explore than all of that, but that seems to be the crux of the issue. And that's a shame because it feels like a system with a lot of potential, and using it is a very nice experience. So there's definitely a story to be continued here. Couple more Sinclairs now. These are Sinclair Plus 3s, so these are the Spectrums with the disk drives rather than the cassette decks. Let's try them both together and see what they're doing, or not doing, as the case may be. I need to put the camera down to carry those both together. At the other end of the popularity contest is the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, a hugely popular system in the UK, but off the back of the failure of the QL, which we saw earlier, as well as Sir Clive's C5, an electric vehicle which arrived about 3 decades too early, it was Amstrad who swooped in and bought the Sinclair computer business. So these +3s are actually made by Amstrad. I won't dwell on these systems for long because a lot of you will be very familiar with them, but in testing I found that both of these systems work, and in both of them the 3-inch disk drive failed, probably just because new drive belts are needed on both of them. Discs were so much faster than the tapes used in the other Spectrums, but by the time this one arrived, tapes were so much cheaper and had become the accepted norm for Spectrum owners. More often than not, you might buy games on a tape for this and then copy them onto disk to enjoy that speed boost, rather than buying any new disk-based software. The game I'm playing here is called Target Renegade, and I'm using neither disk nor tape here. I'm using an SD card solution from our friends at thefuturewas8bit.com. With or without a disk drive though, we can make good use of it now using that SD card solution, through which we can enjoy this huge Spectrum software range. There are tens of thousands of titles for the ZX Spectrum across the whole range, and we can enjoy them all on this model. And I think to round things off, we should look through, let's just have a roundup of all of these cardboard boxes and see what we find in them. We've got one that's mostly full of power supplies and tape decks, but let's go through all these cardboard boxes and see if there are any hidden surprises waiting for us to round off the whole donation. Here are some of the highlights from 3 boxes which we'll dig in. So in the first one we find an Amitech Mamba. Now what is that? It's a TV modulator for Amigas, so if you don't have the Commodore A520 modulator, you can get this third-party one. I can't see that it offers anything above and beyond the stock one, but if your Amiga didn't come with one, or if you wanted a black one, here it is. And it's nice that it's boxed too. That'll be a fun thing to put on the shelf. Also in its box is this spill-resistant keyboard with an image of a cup of tea sloshing right over it. Now that seems useful. I drink a lot of tea. And it has both the PS2 and AT connectors, which makes it super useful for all kinds of machines over the years. It certainly looks brand new, but is it spill resistant? Surely they didn't mean this plastic cover. Is this packaging? Or is this the spill protection? Is it only spill resistant when not in use with that over it, or are you supposed to type through this? I'm not sure, but if we just put that feature to one side, it's a very nice keyboard, so I'm glad to have it. This black box caught my attention because it's an anti-static box, which means it could have something very cool inside. And it really did. In this bag here, I found an Amiga 1200 accelerator card. Now this is a Typhoon 1230 Mark II. It's got a 68030 CPU on it, which I think runs at 40 megahertz. There's an FPU on it. It's got 32 meg of RAM on here. And that is a seriously meaty upgrade for the Amiga 1200. The 1200 is a system we've not restored on the channel yet, and we absolutely must, especially with things like this to add into it. Also in the box was a set of Amiga custom chips, which have clearly come from a battery damaged board. You can see there's a green tinge of corrosion on this CPU along the legs there. There's even a missing leg on it. Now the other chips in here don't look quite as bad. Some of them are a little bit green, so I'd like to give them some ultrasonic cleaning and make sure we've got that all looking shiny and nice. And hopefully when we've done that, these will help us with future repairs. At the bottom of the box is this copy of IBM DOS, which was nice to find, complete with the discs, and there's a whopping great manual inside there. Long-time viewers of the channel will remember that we covered a later version of this very operating system called PC-DOS 2000. So if you want to know a bit more about this and its legacy, that's an episode worth watching. I'll put a link in the video description. The rest of the box here is made up of manuals and guides for various systems that we've seen, and there's also a few sales pamphlets thrown in there too. So for the sake of completeness, it's great to have all of these. We can put them in the library, or we can reunite them with the system boxes where needed. They're certainly very useful to have. Into box number 2 now. This is a slightly smaller box, and the first thing that I saw when I opened it was the Hollywood collection for the Atari ST. It wasn't cheap. There's a $29.99 price tag on there from Boots the Chemists, and it's a very familiar box. I think I saw this, if not in a lot of shops, then certainly in a lot of magazines being pushed by publisher Ocean. This is an interesting cartridge add-on I found for the Dragon 32. This will give you a 51 by 24 character display mode. I think the standard with the Dragon was 32 by 16, so that could be useful for spreadsheets and the like. My home budgeting could get even more exciting on a Dragon with even more columns of text. Also in here was the Atari 520 ST Discovery software pack, so this would have come packed in with the system at the time, and would be familiar to anyone who got that pack when they bought their Atari and punched the air in delight with their baseball cap on back to front. Finally in this box was a couple of plastic disc storage boxes. On the left we've got the 3-inch discs used by the Spectrum Plus 3 and the Tatung Einstein, and on the right are the 3.5-inch discs. Those are Atari ST discs in there, but you're probably more familiar with the 3.5-inch discs than you are with the 3-inch discs. There are some original titles in here, but they're mostly copied discs, and also a few magazine cover discs thrown in there too. And then finally we'll round things off with this gigantic box of fun. This is where all the games are hiding, and there's a lot more besides in here too. We've got joysticks galore, like this very useful QuickShot Maverick. This has got 4 settings on the underside, which you can switch to cover most systems that you might want to use it with. There's more Dragon fun in here with this joystick interface, so this allows you to use D9 joysticks on the system instead of a more limited range of Dragon compatible joysticks which you could buy. So that's actually very useful to have, and again, nice that it's boxed. This very stylish cassette case here houses some VIC-20 titles, and of all of these it's the yellow spined ones which are quite exciting because these are games from Imagine, a software house that burned brightly for a very short time here in the UK, and while the brand was bought and they continue to use the Imagine name, these particular games are from that early period when they were developing their own games. Also in the box are a bunch of Atari 8-bit disc-based games in their very skinny sleeves. I guess you'd call them sleeves rather than boxes that those are in. They would be quite nice to shrink wrap and hang on some pegs in the fake shop. And then there's just tons and tons of cassette games, stacks and stacks of them, including Dragon games, Auric 1 games, Commodore 64 games like this, The Way of the Exploding Fist, and here's a fun thing. David Rowe, the artist who made the cover art for this game, is actually visiting the cave as a special guest soon. So if you want to meet him, if you want to hear him give a talk and spend the day with him showing his art, head over to retrocollective.co.uk and you can book a place to come along. And then this caught my eye. Do you remember those stick-on letters that came with some cassettes so you could label them? It's just one of those things that jumped out and gave me a little flashback when I saw them here, because I hadn't thought about them for years and suddenly they were staring me in the face. That just did something to my brain when I saw those. As I dug through the box, I found even more nostalgic tingles, including this one, Booty. I used to have this with this exact cover art for my Amstrad. It's a really nostalgic one for me to see again. It's published by Firebird, who were the publishing arm of British Telecom at the time. And then there's these VHS style cases which also deserve a mention, because when you come across these they usually just fall into pieces, but this one seems to be in good condition and it's got a nice selection of C64 games in there. So the stars of this final box for me are those Imagine games. We also had that wonderful Amiga accelerator and so much more besides. I'm going to need to go through all of this again just to take it in properly. There's so much wonderful stuff here. I could make 3, 4, 5 episodes going through all of this stuff, but I think we're going to draw the line there. You get the idea of just how wonderful all of this is, how well it's been looked after by Robin, and what immaculate taste he had in the systems that he did collect. And this isn't his whole collection he's donated, by the way. He's kept quite a lot back for himself, including the ones that are most personal to him. So the machines that he had himself back in the day, he's kept hold of those. And I'm really glad that he has, because they're the most important ones to all of us. You know, they're not just great machines, but when they've got that personal connection to them, it's really hard to get rid of them. And a lot of us probably regret getting rid of them back in the day because we had to afford the next thing. So we'd sell it and buy the next thing. But what I wouldn't give to have my original Amstrad CPC or my original Amiga 500. So I'm glad he's kept hold of those. You'll see a lot more of these in future episodes, and you can come and use them if you come and visit the cave. Head over to retrocollective.co.uk if you happen to be in the area or making a trip and you'd like to come and see this or the arcade archive downstairs. I'd love to see you and set these up for you to have a go on. See you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you again, Robin, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.